At the gala organized for my father's retirement, I watched him raise his glass, that familiar smug smirk spreading across his face, the one that always appeared when he was the center of attention. He publicly announced that my brother, Rowan, would be the sole heir to his entire fortune, a thriving company valued at $95 million, a luxurious mansion with panoramic coastal views, and even a private jet, symbolizing our family's wealth and power. The assembled crowd met this news with jubilant cheers and thunderous applause, as if witnessing a monarch's coronation. I, on the other hand, remained in the shadows, silently observing, long accustomed to my role as the invisible family member. Then, his gaze inevitably found me. My father's voice suddenly dropped, becoming sharper, like a razor's edge, the way he spoke when he intended to inflict pain with his words. He declared, "Darren, you will receive nothing. You should never have been born. It would have been better if you had died right after birth." The room fell into an ominous silence for a moment before erupting in a burst of laughter. The guests at the party shamelessly laughed at me, as if my father's cruel words were an innocent joke. My brother, Rowan, leaned back in his chair, smirking as if it were the funniest thing he had ever heard. Even my mother, Elra, didn't utter a single word in my defense. She merely cast her gaze down at her wineglass, as if too frightened or unwilling to intervene. Humiliated and insulted, I abruptly pushed back my chair and stood up to leave the degrading spectacle. Each step toward the exit felt heavier than the last, the deafening laughter ringing in my ears, pursuing me like a malevolent fate. Just as I reached the edge of the room, I felt a hand discreetly slip something into my palm. I looked down and saw a sealed envelope. The family lawyer, my Uncle Grant, leaned in and whispered, "Open it when you're ready." With trembling hands, I tore open the envelope. The very first words printed on the page made my father's face turn deathly pale. He dropped his glass, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. My father's retirement party was not merely a celebratory event, it was a meticulously planned spectacle designed to showcase Victor Holt's boundless power, wealth, and absolute control to the world. The opulent ballroom in his mansion was transformed beyond recognition, as if lifted from the pages of a glossy magazine. Crystal chandeliers, sparkling with hundreds of lights, reflected off the polished marble floors. In a corner, a string quartet played softly, creating an atmosphere of sophistication, while impeccably trained waiters moved silently among the guests, offering trays of champagne and exquisite appetizers. The walls were adorned with numerous photographs of my father, captured in the company of influential governors, successful CEOs, and high-ranking foreign officials, as if he needed to constantly remind everyone present that he had built his empire from the ground up, relying solely on his iron will and indomitable determination. For most guests, it was another glamorous evening in high society. For me, however, it was like entering a room specifically designed to highlight my insignificance and unimportance. Initially, I stood at the back of the hall, trying to remain unnoticed, watching as unfamiliar faces congratulated my brother Rowan, even before my father officially announced his decision. Rowan, as always, was dressed in a flawlessly tailored suit, accentuating his tall stature and the effortless self-assurance he had exuded since childhood. People were drawn to him like iron filings to a magnet. He knew when to laugh, how to shake hands properly, how to appear significant and important even when he said nothing at all. I clearly saw how proud my father was of him, watching Rowan from the other end of the room. Victor Holt was a man who thrived on power and universal admiration. At 67, he still held himself as erect as a general who had never lost a battle. His hair was gray, but his posture remained unfailingly regal and unwavering. People respected him, and many even feared him, and he savored this more than any fine drink or expensive gift. When my father looked at Rowan, his chest swelled with pride. But when his gaze accidentally brushed toward me, there was something cold and detached in it. I was a shadow he tried to ignore, a constant reminder of a mistake he had confessed to me countless times. Even as a child, he told me I should never have been born, that my existence had ruined his plans for a perfect family. He repeated it so often that a part of me began to believe his words. My mother, Elra, moved gracefully through the hall, bestowing her constant, elegant smile upon guests, but her silence was always her reliable armor. She was the embodiment of elegance, dressed in a long evening gown and adorned with a string of pearls, greeting guests with light, almost imperceptible nods. To outsiders, she seemed a dignified matriarch of a powerful family. But to me, she was a woman who had long ago chosen quiet submission over open confrontation. In the shadow of grand announcements and universal jubilation, a drama of personal relationships unfolded. My mother showed her affection only in private, avoiding public support and never daring to defy my father's will. Seeking solace, I found myself near the dessert table, where my Uncle Grant, my father's older brother and the family lawyer, found me. His gaze betrayed weariness, and his voice was weighty and convincing. Unlike my father, my uncle never treated me with disdain. Squeezing my shoulder sympathetically, he asked, "Darren, how are you doing?" I merely offered a weak smile, expressing the resignation acquired from years of living in the Holt family, where the hierarchy was unshakable. Rowan, the elder son, was the center of attention, the heir being groomed to manage the company. I, the younger son, contented myself with little, constantly hearing words of gratitude for any small display of attention. Rowan excelled in everything, sports, academics, and social events, receiving cars, travels, and endless praise from our father as rewards. I preferred reading, music, and volunteering at shelters, which my father considered a waste of time, calling me soft and warning that the world was cruel to the weak. At the party, I tried not to harbor illusions, understanding that all attention would be focused on Rowan. Yet, deep down, a flicker of hope for my father's acknowledgement, however slight, persisted. The evening, however, only confirmed my fears. Guests lined up to congratulate Rowan, the future leader of the company. No one remembered me. I was merely background, the spare son, standing unnoticed by the buffet table. Rowan never missed an opportunity to emphasize his superiority. With feigned sympathy, he quipped, "Relax, Darren. Maybe Dad will leave you a fishing shack so you can live as a hermit and play your guitar." His friends joined in the laughter, and I merely forced a smile, hiding my pain. Such was my life. Rowan's barbs, my silence, my father's cold disdain, my mother's resignation, and my own submission. I had learned to survive in the shadow of the family walls, but survival didn't mean belonging. I felt like an outsider in that hall, filled with people celebrating a future where I had no place. When the loud music began and my father headed to the center stage to deliver his speech, my heart tightened. The moment of truth had arrived. My father was about to officially declare Rowan the heir to the empire, and I was about to experience humiliation once again, realizing my insignificance. The clink of a glass against the microphone heralded the start of his speech. Silence fell over the hall, submitting to Victor Holt's commanding presence. He stood like a titan in the center of the room, bathed in the light of the chandeliers. "Today, we celebrate not only my retirement," he began, "but also the legacy of Holt Enterprises, a company that grew from a small venture into a global corporation valued at $95 million. He surveyed the assembled guests, emphasizing their role in the empire's future. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause. Then, Victor Holt turned to Rowan, who stood by the stage with his head held high. "My eldest son, Rowan," he announced with pride, "is the man I trust to lead this company. He possesses the strength, discipline, and intelligence to expand our name and protect all that we have built. Today, I hand him the keys to the kingdom. The company, the mansion, and even the private jet, all are now his. Rowan Holt is the future." The hall erupted in applause. Rowan accepted congratulations, shaking hands with acquaintances and strangers alike. My father extended his hand to him, and photographers captured this triumphant moment. I remained frozen in my chair, feeling pain despite the predictability of it all. I watched as father and son reveled in their triumph, and then my father's gaze turned to me. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a stern expression. A tense anticipation filled the room. The scene was permeated with cruelty. "As for my other son, Darren," my father declared, pausing long enough to fill the air with oppressive weight, "you will receive nothing." These words fell like a hammer blow, instantly halting all conversation. The clinking of glasses ceased mid-air. My father's voice, like a sharpened blade, became unbearably harsh. "You should never have been born. It would have been better if you had died at birth." For a moment, an ominous silence reigned, soon broken by laughter, sparse at first, but quickly escalating into a malicious chorus. Many guests chuckled awkwardly, some even applauded, as if my father's venom was part of a prearranged performance. Amidst the din, Rowan's voice stood out, triumphing over my humiliation. I choked for air. Blood rushed to my face, my ears rang, and I felt every mocking glance pressed down on me like an unbearable burden. My mother lowered her eyes, staring into her glass, pretending not to hear those words, as if I weren't her son. I wanted to scream, to tell my father that his cruelty wounded far deeper than any disinheritance, but my throat constricted. My entire body felt numb, as if bound by years of insults and neglect. I had been conditioned to silence, and in that moment, it seemed the only weapon capable of saving me from complete collapse in the face of universal contempt. I pushed back my chair and stood up. The scrape of it against the marble floor drew even more stares. My legs felt like cotton as I headed for the exit. Laughter pursued me like a toxic cloud. Rowan's voice, full of biting sarcasm, reached me from behind. "Don't be so sensitive, little brother. Maybe Dad will let you keep your guitar." This remark triggered a new wave of laughter, stabbing into my back. I lowered my head, resolved to leave with what little dignity I had left. Each step was a painful confirmation that I was an outsider in this family, in this empire, in this story. Just as I reached the ballroom exit, I felt a hand slip a sealed envelope into my palm. My Uncle Grant stood nearby, his face serious and unreadable. He leaned in so his words would be heard by no one but me. "Don't leave now," he whispered. "This is from someone who wanted you to know the truth." Embarrassment mingled with shame. Holding the envelope, I felt my hands tremble. For a moment, I wanted to hide it in my pocket and simply walk away. But Grant's gaze indicated it was more than just a symbolic gesture. It was something greater, something truly important. Laughter still echoed behind me. My father's voice once again filled the hall as he toasted Rowan, continuing the evening as if I had never existed. My humiliation hung in the air like thick smoke, but now in my hand was an object far more weighty, capable of holding answers to questions I feared to ask. I turned slightly, glancing at my father, who stood at the center of attention, proud and triumphant, reveling in the power of his words. For years I had endured his cruelty in silence. For years I had accepted the role of the unwanted son. But now, for the first time, I held something capable of challenging him. Running my finger over the seal, I felt my heart pound furiously. I decided that if I was to be humiliated, I would not leave this hall quietly. If this envelope contained the power my uncle hinted at, I would open it right here, in front of everyone. This decision, born from a mix of anger and pain, had the potential to turn the tide of the evening and reveal a truth no one expected to hear. The envelope felt impossibly heavy. My fingers trembled as I held it, the golden seal glinting in the chandelier light. Around me, the celebration continued as usual, as if my public humiliation by my father was just part of the entertainment. Guests clinked glasses, laughter echoed through the hall, and the string quartet resumed playing. My brother basked in the spotlight, smiling and shaking hands, while my father accepted congratulations like a king bestowing favors. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, clutching the envelope, torn between the urge to open it and simply walk away. Uncle Grant's words echoed in my mind. "Don't leave now. This is from someone who wanted you to know the truth." For a long time, I had been the silent one. When my father insulted me, I swallowed the hurt. When Rowan mocked me, I ignored him. When my mother looked away, I convinced myself I didn't need her protection. But standing there with that envelope in my hand, I felt a surge of entirely different emotions. Anger, certainly. Humiliation, undoubtedly. But also a small spark of defiance, buried deep within me for years. I turned back toward the hall. My father continued to speak, recounting stories of Rowan's brilliance, as if this evening were his coronation. Every word felt like another brick in the wall he was building between me and the rest of the family. My brother's smile grew wider with each compliment. Their world was complete and inviolable, while I was an outcast. A mistake, the invisible son. But that was about to end. I returned to my seat, clutching the envelope tightly. Several heads turned my way as I rejoined the table. Some guests smirked as if amused that I hadn't vanished completely. Rowan leaned toward me, whispering loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Couldn't leave, could you? Maybe Dad will let you sweep the hangar where the jet is kept. His friends burst into laughter again, trying to mimic him. But this time, I didn't turn away. I met his gaze and held it. My silence was no longer a sign of submission. It was preparation for something greater. A tense silence hung in the ballroom, as if before a storm. I carefully placed the envelope on the table, trying not to betray my agitation. My mother cast a fleeting, anxious glance at it, but immediately looked away, avoiding direct involvement. My father, noticing the movement, sneered maliciously from the stage. "What's that, Darren? A belated sympathy card?" His caustic laugh provoked a disjointed ripple of chuckles from the crowd, but I tried to ignore it. Steeling myself, I broke the seal. The crisp, distinct sound of tearing paper broke the silence at the corner of the table. Inside lay a folded sheet of thick paper with my grandfather's embossed name and several official sealed documents, the significance of which I had yet to grasp. My heart pounded furiously in my chest as I unfolded the letter. My eyes eagerly scanned the first line, and something inside me seemed to shift. The words contained neither cruelty nor disdain. They were filled with firm resolve and addressed personally to me, not to Rowan or my father. Rising from my chair, I felt the letter tremble in my hand. The conversations around me began to subside. Those present noticed my posture, my expression, and the fact that I was not about to quietly retreat. My father's voice faltered mid-sentence as he realized I had no intention of disappearing without a fight. "What are you doing?" he sharply demanded, uncertainty in his tone. I held up the letter so it was visible from the nearest tables. "I'm going to read this aloud," I declared, my voice sounding far more confident than I expected. "Since you decided to make a mockery of me, let everyone hear the truth." Complete silence fell over the hall. Even the string quartet stopped playing. Rowan let out a nervous chuckle, muttering, "He's just trying to get attention." But the universal silence betrayed him. Everyone was curious about what was written in that letter. Fully unfolding the page, I cleared my throat and scanned the first line again, speaking it aloud. "To my grandson, Darren Holt." A gasp of surprise rippled through the hall. My father's face went pale, and Rowan's smirk instantly vanished. I continued, trying to speak firmly despite the storm raging inside. "If you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer here, and my wishes have been ignored or concealed. I founded Holt Enterprises with the hope that one day the company would be managed by worthy hands, not the strongest or the loudest, but one who possesses integrity, and that person is you, Darren." The ballroom erupted in whispers. My father quickly stepped forward, raising a hand in a cautionary gesture. "Enough! Sit down," he commanded, but I did not stop. "Attached to this letter are legal documents transferring the controlling stake in Holt Enterprises to me. My grandfather made it clear that he wanted me to inherit the company, not Rowan or Victor. He wrote this so that no one could distort his will." The atmosphere in the hall changed instantly. Guests whispered, turning their heads and glancing from me to my father and Rowan. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer invisible. I was the center of attention. The glass my father held slipped from his hand and crashed to the marble floor with a clatter. The sound was like a gunshot. His face contorted in horror as he looked at the documents in my hand. In his eyes, I read something I had never seen before. Fear. My Uncle Grant stepped forward, his voice firm and authoritative. "These are legally binding documents, Victor. You know that as well as I do. Edmund Holt clearly expressed his will." Raising the letter high above my head, I proclaimed, "For years you told me I was nothing. Today, we will see who is telling the truth." After my uncle's declaration, a dead silence fell over the ballroom. Only the sound of champagne dripping from the broken glass disturbed the quiet. For the first time in his life, Victor Holt no longer seemed unshakable. His jaw clenched convulsively, his fists whitened with tension, and his chest heaved. The mask of composure he had worn for decades cracked before hundreds of people. Rowan tried to diffuse the situation with a strained laugh, but to no avail. He approached me, pointing a finger at the documents. "This is a fake, just some old paper dug up to humiliate us. Dad, tell them it means nothing." My father tried to object, but his voice wavered. His authority vanished like water through his fingers. "It's a lie," he mumbled, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Uncle Grant remained unperturbed. With his head held high, he pulled another document from his briefcase. "This is Edmund Holt's notarized directive, witnessed by me and 2 independent witnesses. The controlling stake in Holt Enterprises is to be transferred to Darren Holt upon Victor Holt's retirement. Not to Rowan, not to Victor, but to Darren." A gasp of astonishment rippled through the hall. Guests, who had moments ago laughed at my humiliation, now leaned forward with curiosity, whispering to each other. The balance of power in the room shifted dramatically that evening. I was no longer the punching bag. I had become the man holding the fate of the Holt Empire in my hands. Rowan's face turned crimson with rage as he tried to snatch the documents from me. "This is fraud. You can't just give him everything when I've spent my whole life preparing to run the company. Everyone knows I'm the rightful heir." I pulled my hand back, not allowing him to touch the papers. "Preparing to inherit something doesn't mean you deserve it. Grandfather saw through your arrogance. He knew who you were, and that's why he chose me." My words wounded him, and his smile twisted into a malicious grimace. His voice broke into a shout. "This is madness. He's a nobody. He hides in his room with books and music while I build the company's future. He's weak. He's worthless. He can't run anything." Before I could respond, Grant's voice cut through the tension. "You can argue until you're hoarse, Rowan, but the law relies not on opinions, but on documents like these. Edmund Holt's decision is final and cannot be appealed." My father swayed, grabbing the edge of the podium. His eyes darted between the documents, my face, and the faces of the guests. The mighty Victor Holt, who had built his life on power and pride, looked cornered. I had never seen him so pathetic. Turning to the letter again, I raised my voice so the entire hall could hear. My grandfather wrote, "Do not let cruelty define you as it defined your father. The empire I built should uplift people, not crush them. I entrust it to you, Darren, because you possess compassion. Do not squander it." The words echoed under the high ceilings of the hall. People murmured in disbelief. Some nodded, as if the letter confirmed their long-held suspicions about Victor's ruthless methods. Others looked at me with new respect, as if seeing me for the first time. Victor couldn't take it anymore. His voice broke into a scream. "I built this empire. My sweat, my blood, my sacrifices, and you want to give it all to him, a boy who never wanted it, a mistake that shouldn't have been." His voice rose to a shriek as he pointed a finger at me. "I won't let this happen." But the power he once held was gone. Guests no longer looked at him with admiration. In their eyes were fear, pity, and condemnation. His anger only exposed the bitterness he had hidden for years. I stepped forward and spoke calmly but firmly. "You can't stop this. Grandfather made sure of it. You can call me weak, you can call me a mistake, but today, before everyone you so wanted to impress, the truth is greater than you. The last word was not yours, but his." Rowan tried to lunge at me, but 2 of my father's henchmen pulled him back. Their faces were pale. They had seen enough to understand which way the wind was blowing. Silence fell over the hall once more. I placed the documents back in the envelope and clutched it tightly to my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of responsibility. Not because I had taken something from Rowan or silenced my father, but because someone dear to me had believed in me enough to entrust me with everything. Victor collapsed into a chair, covering his face with his hands. The man who once commanded boardrooms, who held governors and businessmen in fear, sat broken in the middle of his empire. The shards of the broken glass at his feet seemed to reflect the truth. His reign ended not in triumph, but in humiliation. My gaze swept across the faces of those gathered, every eye fixed on me. Holding their breath, the guests awaited my words, the moment I would assume the role defined by my late grandfather's will. This time, there was no trace of doubt in my voice. "My name is Darren Holt. I am the heir to Holt Enterprises, and from this evening forward, the world will change forever." My declaration rippled through the hall, stirring confusion and whispers. Some timidly applauded, others exchanged anxious glances, but everyone understood that the boundaries of the old world had crumbled. I stood tall, sensing my father's brokenness, my brother's burning rage, and my mother's silent support, tears glistening in her eyes. The climax of my life had arrived, and now the humiliations were in the past. I spoke the truth. The atmosphere in the hall changed irrevocably. Loud laughter died down, replaced by a deafening silence broken only by whispers and soft rustling. Guests, who had just recently praised Rowan and toasted my father, now avoided their gazes, confused in their choice of new allegiance. My father, Victor, seemed to shrink under the weight of circumstances, his gaze fixed on the shards of glass on the floor, as if he hoped to reassemble them by force of will. For decades he had used power as a weapon, crushing anyone who dared to challenge him. But this evening, he was stripped of that weapon. He was no longer master of the situation, but had transformed into a pathetic figure, crushed by the burden of truth he had hidden for so long. Rowan, crimson with rage, paced the hall, his fists clenching and unclenching, as if seeking an object for his fury. His gaze restlessly swept over the faces of the guests who had once extolled him, but now they saw not an heir, but a son elevated by lies. In desperation he shouted, "This can't be! I deserve this place!" But the louder his voice, the emptier his words seemed. My mother, Elra, finally rose from her seat. For years she had remained silent, watching the conflicts raging around her like storms she was powerless to stop. She approached me, her eyes full of tears. Taking my hand in hers, she whispered so softly I could barely hear, "Your grandfather was right about you." Her simple words penetrated deeper than any applause. For the first time in years, I felt she was on my side. Guests began to leave the hall in groups, the former splendor of the evening shattered. The very people who had laughed at my humiliation now shook my hand and murmured congratulations, eager to appease the future owner of Holt Enterprises. I accepted their words but did not let them penetrate my heart. I knew too well how quickly praise could turn into mockery. As the ballroom emptied, I stood by the stage, clutching my grandfather's letter. In the silence, I reread his words. They were not just about money and power, but about a legacy that should be used for good. Grandfather chose me not for a loud voice or strength, but for compassion and care. He saw in me what my father refused to acknowledge. In that moment, I understood that this evening was not about proving my father wrong, but about proving to myself that I was never the mistake they called me. For years, I had lived with the feeling that my existence was a burden. But today, the truth gave me what my father could never take away, a sense of belonging. Victor remained silent for the rest of the evening, watching Rowan storm out of the hall in a rage, his curses echoing down the corridor. My mother stayed by my side, silent but supportive. Uncle Grant, placing a hand on my shoulder, said, "It's time for you to take the place that has always belonged to you." I nodded, understanding that the path to leading Holt Enterprises would not be easy. I would face challenges I wasn't prepared for. Resistance, doubts, and eyes anticipating my failure would follow me every step of the way. But I knew I wouldn't run the company like my father. My empire would not be built on fear and cruelty, but on honesty and justice. The lesson of that night was not just about receiving an inheritance, but about the triumph of truth. People might try to hide it, distort it, or mock it, but the truth will always emerge at the right moment. For years, my father convinced me of my worthlessness, but my grandfather's words reminded me that I was always more. And in that realization, I found the strength to take my place. Therefore, in telling this story, I speak not just as a son who was humiliated and then vindicated, but as a person who understood that no cruelty can destroy his worth when he stands on truth.